From Providence, Rhode Island, welcome to the MCU Diaries, a podcast dedicated to Storycraft and meaning behind Marvel. No homework, no timelines, just story. Now, let's break down Earth's mightiest heroes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the MCU Diaries. My name is Blake. Today, we're talking about Secret Wars, what it actually is, structurally, and why Loki Season 1 is the cleanest proof Marvel has ever given us of how this engine works on screen. For years, Secret Wars felt like a multiverse victory lap, a cameo buffet, a flex. At least in the comics, that is. I loved Secret Wars as a kid because it felt like we were just throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. Growing up, Doom was one of my favorite characters, so seeing him in action in this way was perfect for me. Who knows? Maybe Marvel Studios was building towards Secret Wars all along, even when they were actively planning the Kang Dynasty. But after a couple seasons of multiverse-era highs and very low lows, I started to worry Marvel was going to confuse bigger with better. Everything just got too expansive. The multiverse storytelling started to collapse under its own weight. It started to feel like homework that we had to do instead of watching because the story moved us. At that rate, Secret Wars was never going to be good. It would be a pain in the ass. Then I did a Loki Season 1 rewatch, and something changed in me. I realized Secret Wars isn't a topic, it's a machine. It's built to apply pressure until the only remaining move is an impossible choice. And after the choice, something breaks that cannot be unbroken. That's why it can be great, not because it's loud, because it's cruel in a story way. It makes heroes choose who gets to live. Quick thing before we jump in, if you like this series, please subscribe, and if you listen on Apple Podcasts, a quick review helps a ton. This is craft first, not recap. And we're building an MCU Storycraft library you can actually use. The written version lives on maryandblake.com, the visual cut with receipts on screen is on YouTube, and the deeper lab notes toolkit lives on jointhenerdclan.com. Okay, Secret Wars, let's get into it. Secret Wars works when the multiverse stops being options and becomes a moral crisis. Two realities collide. You don't get a third door. You get a decision. And the only way it matters is if the decision leaves a scar. Before we go any further, quick spoiler light primer. Because I keep saying Secret Wars like everybody's read it. And not all of you are complete dorks like me. Secret Wars is Marvel's end-of-everything engine. Multiple realities start colliding, and suddenly survival isn't a punch-up, it's moral math. The pressure becomes, what do you do when two worlds can't both live? That's why it hits when it hits. The multiverse stops being possibilities and becomes a crisis that forces an impossible choice. And then the key question isn't who wins, it's who gets to decide what the world looks like after the collapse. That's the feeling Loki Season 1 is training you for, not with exposition, but with structure. This is why I always come back to McKee, because he gives us the simplest yardstick for whether any big story actually has weight. Pressure is essential. Choices made when nothing is at risk mean little. Robert McKee, Story. That's the Secret Wars engine in one sentence. Pressure that forces choice, and choice that costs something permanent. Rule 1, infinite options are weightless. The multiverse becomes story only when the story starts closing doors. If everything is possible, nothing is meaningful. Meaning shows up when possibilities collapse into a dilemma. Rule 2, the engine is always pressure to dilemma to choice. If you can't phrase your climax as an either-or where both sides hurt, you don't have an engine. You have a sandbox. Rule 3, the scar test. After the big choice, what mark remains? Identity changes, relationships change, the world changes. If the scar disappears, the stakes disappear with it. Now we go on screen. Loki Season 1. And we're doing this as mini-scene stories, where we are, what the character wants, what turns, and what it costs. Because that's the only way to prove this without drifting into lore. Scene 1, the TVA intake, door closing as structure. We're in the TVA, and the first thing the show does is strip the place of fantasy, beige walls, fluorescent lights, forms, stamps, cues. It doesn't feel like sci-fi wonder. It feels like the DMV got promoted to God. That's not aesthetic, that's a story argument. This world is telling you your life can be reduced to paperwork. What Loki wants is the thing Loki always wants: control. He wants to talk his way out. He wants to weaponize charm. He wants the room. He wants to perform power and make people believe it. Then the turn. His magic doesn't work. And that moment matters more than 100 multiverse explainer videos because it's the show physically removing the hero's escape hatch. No powers, no shortcuts, no, I'll just outsmart the universe. The story closes a door and forces Loki into the only arena that matters: identity under pressure. The cost is humiliation turning into need. Loki isn't losing to a punch. He's losing to a system, and that's the first prologue lesson for Secret Wars. The real power isn't a weapon. It's rule control. Whoever owns the rules owns reality. Scene 2, time theater, pressure that forces a new desire. Now we sit Loki down in the time theater. The staging is perfect. It's basically court-ordered consequence. The TVA makes him watch his own life like evidence. His mother dies. His future collapses. He watches the version of himself who could have been better, and he watches his end. What Loki wants is to deny it, to laugh it off, to keep the mask, I don't care. Because Loki's entire coping mechanism is performance. If he can control the story you believe about him, he doesn't have to feel what he actually is. The turn is that the footage pins him to the wall. This is a value shift scene. Confidence becomes exposure. Performance becomes proof. Loki can't out-talk reality when reality is playing back his future. And here's the structural consequence. His desire changes. He stops wanting to win the room and starts wanting meaning. He wants the universe to make sense. He wants the chaos to be authored. That pivot is massive because once a character wants meaning, they become vulnerable to any ideology that promises it. And that's what the TVA is selling. Not justice, not truth, meaning. This is the plan. This is the story. Your suffering fits. Scene 3, Pompeii and the Apocalypse rule. Constraints make multiverse matter. Now we hit one of the most important proof scenes in the entire season. Loki and Mobius testing apocalypse events. The plot reason is we're hunting a variant. The structural reason is much bigger. Loki Season 1 is establishing a principle. Multiverse branches are not infinite. They are conditional. They have rules. What Loki wants here is leverage. He wants to find a loophole, and the show gives him one. But notice what kind of loophole it is. It isn't anything goes. It's nothing matters here. In an apocalypse, actions don't generate new branches because everyone dies anyway. The turn is the idea itself. The multiverse is not a playground. It's a system with constraints, and constraints are what create meaning. When the story tells you you can't branch here, it's telling you that choices only matter when the world is capable of carrying the scar forward. That's Secret Wars thinking. Secret Wars is not look at all the possibilities. Secret Wars is you are trapped inside consequence. Scene 4, the drawer. Rule power replaces weapon power. Then we get the drawer. Infinity Stones. Not in a shrine, not in a vault, in an office drawer like paperweights. That is one of the most aggressive, clean visual arguments Marvel has ever made. What Loki wants in that moment is context. He needs to know what game he's in, because the old game just died. If the stones don't matter here, then power has been redefined. The turn is that Marvel shows you the new hierarchy. Weapon power is subordinate to rule power. This saga isn't built on who has the biggest gun, it's built on who controls the rules of reality. And if you're building towards Secret Wars, especially a version that involves rewriting the world, this is the only kind of power that makes sense. The cost is fear with clarity, because once rules are the real power, the villain you should fear isn't the one who can punch you through a wall. It's the one who can make your punch irrelevant. Scene 5, the Citadel Fork, crisis, both doors hurt. Now we get to the Citadel. And here's why this finale is the real Secret Wars prologue. It isn't staged like a boss battle. It's staged like a writer's room with the universe on the table. He who remains isn't selling a plan. He's selling authorship. He's selling a story you can live inside. This is where Truby becomes a cheat code for talking about structure without sounding like a textbook. The 7 key story structure steps are weakness and need, desire, opponent, plan, battle, self-revelation, new equilibrium. John Truby, The Anatomy of Story. In this scene, the opponent isn't just a guy. The opponent is the argument that order is worth any cost, that stability is mercy, that free will is a threat. And then the story does the most important Secret Wars thing possible. It collapses the options into 2 doors: kill him and unleash chaos, spare him and accept tyranny. That's crisis, not a hard scene. A moral dilemma where every option costs something you do not want to pay. Scene 6. Sylvie. Character turns the key. Scar becomes real. Now, Sylvie. This is where the whole thing stops being concept and becomes character. Sylvie is not making a plot move. She is answering her wound. Her agency was stolen. Her life was pruned. Her existence was treated as an error. So when she stands in front of the person offering order, she's not hearing peace. She's hearing another cage with better PR. What Loki wants is pause, negotiation, control variables. He wants to solve the puzzle so the pain doesn't have to happen. That's Loki's wiring resurfacing. If I can just outthink this, I can avoid the cost. The turn is that their wants cannot coexist. Loki wants authored meaning. Sylvie wants the debt paid. So the choice happens. And now the scar test hits like a truck. Branches explode. Reality fractures. Loki returns to a TVA that doesn't recognize him. The world has changed, and it stays changed. The story commits. That's the proof. That's the engine. Pressure to dilemma, to choice, to scar. Loki Season 1 doesn't lecture you into caring about multiverse rules. It makes you feel the cost of a decision that rewrites reality. Okay, now we connect the dots to Secret Wars without turning this into a Wikipedia page. Secret Wars works when the multiverse forces heroes into moral math they can't hero pose their way through, not can we win the fight, or what do we destroy to survive? And the reason it lands is that it weaponizes the hero's values. It turns save everyone into a lie you can't afford. So here's the takeaway tool you can use on anything. If your climax is not an either-or dilemma where both outcomes leave a scar, you don't have Secret Wars. You have multiverse tourism. And multiverse tourism evaporates the second the credits hit because nothing had to change. All right, Doom Ledger. Moves toward Doomsday. Loki proves the saga's fuel is consequence that sticks. Choices that fracture reality and fractures that don't unhappen. Loki doesn't give you Battleworld. It gives you the structural template that makes Battleworld feel necessary instead of random. Odds today, 65% Marvel translates incursions into one brutal moral choice instead of a rules lecture. If they do that, we're in business. If they don't, it's fireworks over an empty parking lot.
All right, That is the MCU Diaries entry for today. If you want the written version of this episode, you can find it on marianblakemedia.com. If you want the deeper cut, however, the behind-the-scenes breakdown, well, you can join the Nerd Clan at jointhenerdclan.com. Of course, subscribe to wherever you're listening to this episode. Follow the show on any of the major social media platforms. Leave a rating where you're listening to this, and tell us next time what you think the pattern is.